Tonight on The ReidOut.
I have to say that statement that we saw from the Secret Service, that basically there were messages lost, but none of them pertain to what we're investigating. I don't know how, if they're lost, you can draw that conclusion with such confidence. So something doesn't seem quite right.
In a nod to the erased Watergate tape, Secret Service text messages from January 6th and the day before are gone for good. Plus, what we know about that 187 minutes that Trump did nothing to stop the violence on January 6th, and what more we might learn at Thursday's primetime hearing. Also tonight, I'll be joined by the attorney for the doctor who was defamed by Indiana's Attorney General for doing her job, ending the pregnancy of a raped 10-year-old girl. And this is just too awful to ignore. A viral video of a costumed employee at Sesame Place giving the cold shoulder to two adorable black girls. Now, others are coming forward to say it happened to them too. We begin tonight with what those in charge of protecting the president might be protecting themselves, with growing questions over deleted text messages from agents on the day of the insurrection. As the January 6th committee collects additional evidence ahead of Thursday's primetime hearing, NBC News has learned that the Secret Service said it has no new text messages related to the attack to hand over. The Washington Post first reported the development, knowing that any other texts that agents exchanged around the time of the attack on the Capitol were purged. In other words, potential real-time communications of agents in contact with the former president on that day are likely gone forever. The wiped messages were disclosed last week by the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General, and the Secret Service has denied that the text messages were deleted maliciously, but as part of a system reset, apparently lost in migration. Committee member Stephanie Murray described the Secret Service's actions to the great Nicole Wallace.
Their process, as explained to us, was simply to leave it to the agents to determine whether or not there was anything on their phones worth saving that was necessary to save for federal records. And as a result, today they did not receive any texts from their agents when they made that transition that was flagged for preservation.
Murphy said the Secret Service would continue to explore additional ways to secure the subpoenaed text messages. For its part, in a statement, the Secret Service spokesman says the agency continues to be fully cooperative with the January 6th Select Committee, noting that the agency delivered an initial set of documents and records in response to last week's subpoenas. That includes documents as well as Secret Service cell phone use and other policies, as well as operational and planning records. Today, the National Archives called on the Secret Service to investigate the potential unauthorized deletion of texts. The Secret Service has 30 days to explain what was deleted and how it was lost. A spokesman for the Secret Service said it will cooperate with that request. Now, all of this comes as the committee is preparing for more bombshell testimony in Thursday's primetime hearing. It will proceed as scheduled without committee chair Benny Thompson, who has tested positive with COVID. We wish him a speedy recovery. The hearing is expected to focus on Trump's 187 minutes of inaction during the attack on the Capitol and will feature new testimony from two former Trump administration officials, former Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Matthews and former Deputy National Security Advisor Matthew Pottinger, who both resigned in the aftermath of the attack. In her deposition, Matthews recalled the effort to get the former president to make a statement.
We had all talked about at that point about how it was bad and the situation was getting out of hand. We thought that the president needed to tweet something immediately. We all got a notification, so we knew it was a tweet from the president, and we looked down and it was a tweet about Mike Pence. It was clear that it was escalating quickly. The situation was already bad. And so it felt like he was pouring gasoline on the fire by tweeting that.
Meanwhile, Matthew Pottinger said the former president's tweet at 2:24 p.m. on January 6th, attacking Vice President Mike Pence, was the turning point for him.
The tweet said something to the effect that Mike Pence, the vice president, didn't have the courage to do what should have been done. I read that tweet and made a decision at that moment to resign. that's where I knew that I was leaving that day.
Joining me now is Asawin Suebasang, senior politics reporter for Rolling Stone, Charles Coleman Jr., a civil rights attorney and former prosecutor, and Juanita Tolliver, Democratic strategist and MSNBC political analyst. Thank you all for being here. I want to start with the Secret Service situation, Asawin, because it is just fishy to me. And there's a history here. One of my great producers pulled this piece from Carol Leonnig, and she's reporting about the history of the Secret Service of losing critical records. And here's what Carol Leonnig wrote. The Secret Service has had a history of important records disappearing under cover of night and agency staff members refusing to cooperate. When a congressional committee was investigating assassinations and assassination attempts, it sought boxes of records that reportedly showed the Secret Service received ample advanced warnings and threats before President John F. Kennedy's death that white supremacists and other organizations were plotting to kill Kennedy using high-powered rifles from tall buildings. The Secret Service told investigators that records had been destroyed, wait for it, as part of a normal culling of old archives, days after investigators had requested them. So, just as a journalist, do these denials of nothing being fishy, nothing to see here, how do those ring with you?
Well, the situation at the very least right now does not look good at all. But just to back it up for a moment, in terms of what Donald Trump, while he was president, demanded of his own Secret Service detail, here's what we know based on conversations with people who worked with him at the time during his administration. He personally, whether or not he got it on individual case-by-case basis, demanded virtually the same kind of fealty and loyalty that he would demand of a senior administration official, an attorney general, a White House lawyer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So to him, what he was demanding of his Secret Service detail was not that much different from what he was demanding of other staff in the administration and in the West Wing. So there's that. Having said that, in terms of what these deleted texts means, there's more investigation and to be done, and a lot more answers to actually come to fruition. I don't want to jump the gun on anything, so to speak. But at the very least, on the record denials from a Secret Service spokesperson is not nearly enough right now in order to clear up all the questions remaining on this. The first question I have is, do they know if the purged messages were from agents on Pence's or Donald Trump's detail? That is an important unanswered question right now.
There's a lot of unanswered questions. I'm going to go to you on this, Charles, because it would be relevant that the people who were the most physically close, in the closest physical proximity to Donald Trump on the day of the insurrection, that would be his Secret Service detail. What were they saying to each other? What were they saying to other people like Tony Ornato, who very unusually went from being on Trump's detail to getting a job in the White House? That doesn't happen very often, to the point that Asawin was just making, that the closeness was so real that he elevated a Secret Service agent to that kind of a job. The ultra loyalty means that you don't know what they were saying, and they could have been saying something relevant. If, as a prosecutor looking at this, is there a way to reconstruct these things based on them handing over the phone records of who people were calling? Or is there any way to reconstruct, or are these records just gone?
Well, Joy, to reconstruct the actual text messages is going to be a Herculean task. I think that if you're talking about how to get in substance what those conversations were, you're exactly right. You would triangulate the cell phones, you would figure out who was where and what proximity they were to one another, because more than likely, if they weren't having conversations via text, they were having conversations orally and verbally with one another. And then after that, in terms of your investigation, you would then look to talk to every one of those to see how their different versions of the accounts and the conversation sort of matched up. But there is an important point that I want to make very quickly. I've been in charge of trials. I've been in charge of investigations before. And one thing that I can say is that every case is about a story. And you have to be careful. In the course of any investigation, there are always going to be these sort of rabbit holes that are distractions to the actual main story. The challenge that the committee has going forward right now is how deep do they explore this rabbit hole in the moment as they are dealing with trying to get these hearings wrapped up, trying to get a report out, and trying to deal with the other considerations and moving parts that are going on. I am absolutely convinced that this angle needs to be explored, but the question is by whom and at what point, because you can't get away from the main story of what this is all about.
And that is the important point, Juanita. The job of this committee is to tell a coherent story in as a sort of limited amount of time, because people are only going to have so much attention span to keep following this. What do you make of the fact that they're going to go forward with this hearing? We are going to hear from these live witnesses in prime time, even despite the fact that the chairman now, because of COVID, cannot necessarily be a part of it. I mean, they've been doing a lot of stuff virtually. He might be able to be a part of it in some way.
Look, this is a robust team, so I'm sure they can operate with the chairman in the room and without him not there. And I think they're still going to paint a minute-by-minute portrayal of what was happening in the chaos of the White House. I think what Pottinger emphasized in the testimony you showed earlier was that we knew his cutoff moment. He packed his box as soon as that tweet about Pence came out. But before that, his other testimony showed that he was witnessing the chaos of around the Oval Office of why the National Guard hadn't been deployed, why there was no backup headed to the Capitol to quash this mob, which everyone in the White House at this point knew was armed, right? Like, I think the other thing that I'm looking forward to hearing from Sarah Matthews in the story she's going to tell is probably going to pick up where Cassidy Hutchinson left off with hearing conversations in real time. She, in previous testimony, said the dining room door was open and she could hear that Trump was in a very, very good mood in the evening of January 6th. She also is going to be able to fill in gaps around communication and how long it took to actually get Trump to even film a message or release a message to tell people to go home. And we know what we ended up with, a message that he said he loved the insurrectionists, right? So she's going to be able to give that minute-by-minute playbook as well as Pottinger. And I think that's still going to tell a beautiful story. But the last point about the Secret Service is, remember, the Select Committee has been interviewing Secret Service agents for the past few months. And I feel like this is an opportunity where they could quickly go back to those individuals and have additional conversations to cross-check any previous testimony or ask new questions based on the fact that the Secret Service did delete this information, which Representative Stephanie Murphy was right to say this was too important to mismanage or mishandle or just to delete, especially in the days after a violent attack on our Capitol.